Welcome to Nightfall Tales. Take a slow, gentle breath in and softly let it go. Settle into your bed or favorite chair. Gently close your eyes and let your body relax. As you unwind, I'd love to know where you're listening from, your city or country. Down in the comments. It's so comforting to feel this quiet. Let my voice carry you softly to a place where imagination wanders and calm dreams begin. Snow had been falling for hours before Elara understood that she was lost. Not lost in the frightening sense, not the cold terror of a name dissolving into white, but lost in the softer, older sense, the sense of a path becoming something else, of the familiar world growing quiet and giving way, by degrees, to something she had no word for yet. The road she had been following, a grey ribbon of packed earth that climbed gently through stands of pine, had narrowed first to a track, then to a suggestion, and then to nothing at all, except the patient weight of snow falling in soft, unhurried curtains through the deepening blue of late afternoon. The storm did not howl. It did not rage. It fell the way breath falls, slowly, inevitably, with a kind of tenderness that made the cold seem less like cold, and more like a blanket drawn close. The trees on either side of her held their white burdens in silence. The only sound was the soft crunch of her own footsteps, and the blood moving in her ears, and something else. Something she could not at first identify, a low, steady murmuring, the voice of water over stone, far below in some hidden fold of the valley. She followed the sound because she had no better direction. She followed it down through a stand of birches whose pale trunks rose like candles in the dusk, their bare branches laced with ice, their roots lost in drifts that reached her knees and then her thighs, and then, on a sudden step downward, fell away entirely, leaving her on a hillside she had not seen coming, looking down into a valley she had never seen on any map. And there it was. The village resting in the hollow of the earth the way a stone rests in a palm, quietly, completely, as though it had always been there and had simply been waiting for someone to look at the right angle, in the right light, at the right hour. The houses were small and close together, their roofs carrying impossible loads of snow that curved at the eaves like the shoulders of sleeping animals. Each window glowed, not the harsh blue, white of electricity, but the warm amber, slightly uneven glow of firelight and candles, the kind of light that breathes and shifts and makes the dark outside seem welcoming by contrast, because inside is so precisely, perfectly warm. The glow from each window was steady as a held note, steady as a star seen through clear air. The village did not flicker, it endured. At the centre of the cluster of rooftops, a church rose above the rest, its small spire disappearing into the low cloud, and in the face of its bell tower, visible even from this distance, even in this light, was a clock. The hands had stopped. She could not read the hour. Not yet. Not from up here on the hillside, with the snow coming down between her and the world below. But she could see that the hands were motionless, held in place at some forgotten hour. The clock face pale as the stream she had followed was somewhere below the village. She understood now, hidden beneath the snow, covered banks, its voice rising through the frozen air like a thread of warmth. She went down. The innkeeper was a woman of perhaps 60, with grey threaded hair pinned simply back, and the steady eyes of someone who was not often surprised. She opened the door before Elara could knock. Or perhaps Elara had knocked and simply not remembered doing so. The boundary between arriving and being inside was, in this place, surprisingly unclear. The warmth of the inn fell over her like a hand laid gently on a shoulder. There was a fire in a wide stone hearth. There were wooden tables worn smooth by decades of palms. There was the smell of wood smoke and something baking and beeswax candles burning in a row along the deep windowsill. And underneath it all, faint as a dream's edge, the ghost of old paper and dried lavender. The innkeeper took Elara's coat without being asked and hung it near the fire. And she brought a cup of something warm and set it on the table. And she said nothing for a long moment, simply looked at her guest with that steady, unsurprised gaze, as though Elara's arriving through a snowstorm on a winter evening was neither unusual nor unexpected. "There is a room," she said at last. Her voice was unhurried. "At the top of the stairs it has a window." She smiled briefly, the way a candle flame shifts, almost nothing, and then entirely itself again. "The view is good." Her room was small and exactly right. The bed was narrow and high off the floor, the mattress thick with feather and time, covered in a blanket of undyed wool that smelled of cedar and the sleep of other winters. There was a washstand with a white ceramic basin, a mirror no bigger than a book whose silver had gone soft with age, a low wooden chair drawn close to the window, and a fire already burning in the small iron grate, banked low, just enough to push the cold back from the walls and keep the air dry and faintly amber. The floorboards were wide and worn and gave softly underfoot, each plank with its own particular voice, a low creak here, a softer settling there, the way old wood speaks when it has learned to carry weight. Without complaint, Elara set down her bag and stood for a moment in the centre of the room, and breathed in out. The fire shifted, a log broke and settled, and a small cascade of sparks moved up the flue and were gone. The window looked out over the village square, and there, directly in her line of sight, was the clock in the bell tower. From here she could read it clearly. Both hands pointed to the same place. A little before 9, or perhaps a little before 3, without knowing which hand was which in the half-dark. The hour was ambiguous, caught between two possibilities. Committed to neither. The clock face was pale, faintly luminous, its Roman numerals dark against the cream-coloured stone. Ice had formed along the rim of the casing, long fingers of it reaching down from the tower's overhanging cornice, and the snow had gathered in the carved relief around the face, until the whole thing resembled something less like a mechanical instrument and more like a feature of the landscape, a stone formation, a natural thing, as though the clock had grown there, the way a shelf of rock grows from a hillside, patient and indifferent to the hours it could no longer keep. The snow fell on it without hurry. The clock held its frozen hour. She was pulling her boots off when she noticed the book. It was on the bedside table, a small table of dark, smooth wood, its single-drawer handle worn to a soft gleam by long use, and the book was resting there as though it had always been there, and had simply been waiting for her to notice. It was small, perhaps the size of her palm, bound in leather the colour of old bark, with no title on the cover, and no author's name on the spine. She took it up. The leather was warm, warmer than she expected, as though it had been held recently. though she had seen no one carry it into the room. It was soft with handling, creased at the corners with the faint impressions of many thumbs, many palms. She brought it with her to the chair by the window and opened it to the first page. There was no title page. There was no date, no inscription, no dedication. There was only a single sentence, written in a hand that was careful and slightly old-fashioned, the letters formed with the particular deliberateness of someone who wished to be understood. I stayed because I was ready to stop. She turned the page. The same sentence, written in a different hand. This one looser, more hurried, as though the writer had been in the middle of something and had put the pen to the page without pausing to compose themselves. Then another page, the same sentence again, in a hand that leaned sharply to the right. The letters narrow and close together, the ink a slightly different shade of brown page after page, the same sentence written over and over, by hands she did not know and could not name, each one distinct, each one unmistakably human. The slight tremor of age in one, the confident flourish of a practiced writer in another, the hesitant, pressing strokes of someone who had not held a pen in a long time. Some had underlined a word, some had pressed so hard, the letters had left impressions on the pages beneath. Ghost sentences that whispered through the book like echoes. Some entries were barely legible, the letters fading, the ink thin as water. Some were bold and dark, as though the writer had not been uncertain at all, as though they had written the sentence not as a confession but as a conclusion. I stayed because I was ready to stop. She did not count the pages, she did not count the hands. She turned them slowly, one after another. In the firelight and the window, light, with the snow falling outside, and the clock holding its silent hour, and she felt something happening in her chest that she did not immediately have a name for. It was not sadness. It was not longing exactly. It was something quieter than either of those, something that lived closer to recognition, to the feeling of seeing your own reflection in an unexpected place and understanding, for a moment, exactly what you look like. Each of these people had been here. Each of them had sat, she thought, perhaps in this very chair, by this very window, and had turned these very pages, and had read what came before their own entry, and had taken up the pen that rested now in the drawer of the bedside table. She opened it, and yes, there it was, a small pen of dark wood with a brass nib, lying in the shallow wooden groove as though it had just been set down, and had added their own line, not because they had been asked, not because there was a rule or an instruction or an expectation, but because they had arrived at something, and they had wished, in some quiet way, to mark it. Why did they stop? The question formed in her mind, and then, just as it formed, she felt it dissolve, not because it was answered, but because it became unnecessary. She knew why. She could feel why, sitting here in this chair, in this room, with this book in her hands, and the fire behind her, and the frozen clock in the window. She had always known why, if the knowing had simply been buried under other things for a very long time. For a long while she sat without reading. The book was closed on her lap. The fire spoke in small voices. The pop of a knot releasing. The low sustained breath of the wood burning steadily down to coals. The faint ticking of the grate as the metal expanded in the heat. Outside, the snow fell in patient silence. The windows of the houses across the square glowed like steady stars. The village asked nothing of those who came. It simply was, and went on being, and let the snow fall on it, and the light glow from it, and the stream run beneath it. And it did not hurry any of these things. She thought of her life before this valley. It was not a difficult life. She had never called it difficult. But thinking of it now, from this chair, in this light, she felt something that surprised her in its plainness. She was tired. She was tired in the way that a road is tired, in the way that a path worn by long use is tired, smoothed, and compacted, and reliable. Yes, but drained of something that had once been there, some quality of the surface, some original texture. She had been moving for so long, and with such consistency, that the movement had ceased to feel like movement, and had begun to feel simply like the nature of things. This is what life is. She had told herself without quite knowing she was telling herself anything. This is what being a person in the world requires: the forward motion, the planning, the calendar pages, turning, the hours accounted for and spent and exchanged for other hours, each one marked and weighed and measured against what came before and what would come after. The constant, exhausting arithmetic of time. She had not known, until this moment, how much of herself had been consumed by that arithmetic. She had not felt the weight, because she had been carrying it for so long that it had ceased to feel like a weight and had begun to feel like a self. The tiredness was not in her body. It was in the part of her that kept the tally, the part that remembered the appointments and the obligations and the small daily urgencies that accumulated, one on top of another, until they formed something as heavy and as solid as stone. She pressed her palm to the cool glass of the window. The cold came through cleanly, without cruelty, just cold. Just the simple fact of winter on the other side. It felt clarifying. It felt like the answer to a question she had stopped remembering to ask. The clock held its frozen hour. The snow fell on its face and gathered in the carved Roman numerals and made the 2 and the Ivor and the 8th into soft white ledges, tiny valleys of their own, miniature versions of the valley that held them all. She watched this without thinking anything in particular. She watched it the way she had watched the fire earlier, not to understand it, not to extract meaning from it, but simply to see it, to register the fact of it, to be a pair of eyes in a warm room looking out at a quiet world. It had been a very long time since she had done something simply and only and completely that looked at a thing without purpose, without the secondary movement of the mind that immediately converted what she saw into something useful, something accessible, something to be filed or acted upon or transformed into the currency of plans. The people who had written in the book were not lost. She understood that now with a certainty that surprised her in its quietness, its absence of drama. They had not stumbled here in confusion and been too bewildered to leave. They had arrived, as she had arrived, through a storm, through a narrowing road, through the gradual dissolution of the familiar, and they had found, in this room or another room in this inn, by this window or another window, the same thing she was finding, a permission she had not known she needed. The village did not offer this permission in any explicit way. There was no placard on the wall, no instruction written above the door. It was simply there, in the quality of the silence, in the steadiness of the light, in the way the innkeeper had not asked her where she came from or where she was going, had simply taken her coat and brought her warmth and shown her to a room with a view of the frozen clock. The village asked nothing of those who came, and in asking nothing, in the profound, patient absence of demand, it offered everything. To stop. That was what the sentence said, over and over in all those different hands. Not to sleep, not to hide, not to retreat, to stop, to arrive at a place that was not a waypoint but a destination, and to recognize it as such, and to lay down the arithmetic, and to be, for a while, or perhaps for longer than a while, simply a person in a room with a fire and a window and a book of hands, watching the snow fall on a clock that no longer counted anything. She pressed her forehead against the cool glass, very gently, and the cold met her warmth, and held it. And outside, the snow fell in patient silence, and the village glowed like something ancient and entirely at peace. She thought of the word ready. The sentence did not say, I stayed because I was tired, or I stayed because I was afraid to go back. It said ready was a different thing. Ready was not the end of something. It was the arrival at something you became ready. The way fruit became ripe, not by force or urgency, but by the slow accumulation of everything that had been growing toward this moment. She had been growing toward this moment. She understood, for longer than she could measure. Every year of forward motion, every hour of the tally, every page turned on the calendar, all of it had been, without her knowing it, a kind of preparation. The exhaustion was not failure. The exhaustion was maturity. The exhaustion was the sign that she had arrived. She opened the drawer and took out the pen. It was smooth in her hand, the wood worn to a faint patina by all the hands that had held it before hers. She could feel the subtle dips and rises where thumbs had pressed, where fingers had rested, the accumulated texture of many grips. She opened the book to the last written page and turned forward to the first blank one. The page was cream, coloured in the firelight, faintly warm, the grain of the paper visible if she tilted it toward the window. She dipped the nib. There was a small inkwell in the drawer, too. She had not noticed it at first, dark and stoppered with a cork worn soft, and she held the pen above the page for a moment. She did not need to think about what to write. The sentence was already there, waiting in her, the way the village had been waiting, the way the book had been waiting on the table. She wrote, "I stayed because I was ready to stop." Her hand was steady. The letters formed cleanly, not hurried, not laboured. The handwriting of a person who was simply present, writing a true thing in a quiet room. She set the pen in the drawer and blotted the page gently with the corner of the blanket. An instinctive gesture, unhurried. And she closed the book and set it back on the bedside table, where it settled into its place with the soft certainty of a thing that has been set down and means to stay. She did not feel she had claimed anything. She did not feel she had committed to anything. Exactly. No contract, no vow, no line that could not be uncrossed. She felt instead that she had acknowledged something, that the acknowledgement itself was enough, that the village had not needed her to decide anything, only to recognize what she had already, somewhere beneath the arithmetic and the forward motion. All the book was full of these recognitions, all those hands, all those sentences, and each one had been sufficient. Each writer had set down the pen and gone on, into the next morning, into the village, into whatever particular form their stopping had taken. And the book had waited for the next traveller, and the traveller had come, and the sentence had been written again, and the book had waited again, not collecting confessions, but receiving arrivals. She would walk the village paths tomorrow. She had understood this the way you understand things in dreams, not through reasoning but through a kind of full body, knowing that bypassed the analytical mind entirely. She would walk the paths that the snow had softened and the cold had stilled, and she would find the places where the snow lay undisturbed on window ledges and fence posts, and the low stone wall that ran along the edge of the churchyard. She would find the stream the one she had heard from the hillside, the one that never froze, whose voice was the first sound she had noticed as she descended, and she would stand beside it and listen to it moving over its stones, and she would feel the cold rising from the water and the warmth of her own breath in the air, and she would not think about where else she might be standing, about what else she might be doing with the hour. She would sit in the church. She had not been inside a church in many years, not from any particular aversion, but simply because there had not been time, or rather because she had never allocated the time, had never placed it in the arithmetic as a thing worth the cost of the hour. But here, in this village, time was not a cost. It was simply a quality of the air, like temperature or light present, neutral, uncommanding. She would sit in the cold wooden pews and look up at whatever the church's windows offered, plain glass perhaps, or the soft colours of old stained work, and she would look at the clock through the tower's interior, the mechanism still, the hands as frozen from this side as from the other, and she would feel no particular desire to start them again. Some things are better for having stopped. Some truths are only legible in stillness. She would not leave, not yet, perhaps not ever, and that thought, which should have frightened her, which in another life and another room would have sent a cold thread of panic through her chest, arrived instead as something like relief. Some places are not found by accident. She knew this now as she had not known it this morning, when she had been a different version of herself. The version that kept the tally, that moved forward, that traded hours for outcomes. The storm had not blown her here. The road had not failed her here. She had come because something in her, some navigation older than maps and more reliable than certainty, had brought her where she needed to be. The village had been waiting because she had been on her way. Some places are not found by accident, but by readiness. She went to bed. The blanket was warm and heavy over her, the wool thick and soft against her chin, the pillow cool on one side and yielding to her cheek's weight. The fire had burned down to a low rose-coloured glow that moved over the ceiling in slow, almost imperceptible waves. Not the restless flickering of a high fire, but the deep settled breathing of embers that have done their work and are resting in the accomplishment of it. She did not lie awake. She did not think, in the way she usually thought, of tomorrow's obligations or yesterday's unpaid debts of attention. She listened to the silence of the village, which was not a complete silence. The fire breathed, the beams settled, the snow fell outside with a soft, barely perceptible weight, but a silence of content, a silence that meant nothing was being asked of anyone, that the night had no requirements, that the hours would pass as they had always passed in this valley, slowly and without urgency, each one indistinguishable from the last, each one exactly as long as it needed to be. The snow continued to fall, soft and patient, on the rooftops and the paths and the stone wall around the churchyard and the frozen face of the clock. The clock held its eternal hour. The windows of the inn glowed warm and steady against the blue, grey dark. The stream somewhere below moved over its stones and never froze, its voice rising faintly to the surface of the night, a murmur so constant that it had already become part of what she meant when she thought of silence. In her dreams she walked the paths of the village in the slow, unhurried manner of someone who knows that the path goes nowhere in particular and is glad of it. The snow was deep on either side. and the sky was pale with the particular luminosity of overcast winter, that soft, directionless light that falls without shadow and makes the world look like something drawn in chalk. She walked past the houses, each one quiet, each one with its warm window. She walked past the church and looked up at the clock and felt nothing but a gentle and complete acceptance of its stillness. She walked to the edge of the village and found the stream and stood beside it, watching the water move dark and quick between its white banks. And she felt the cold of it and the sound of it, and she did not feel lonely, not even slightly, not even for a moment. When she woke, the fire would need building up. The room would be cool, and the window would show her a world still white, still patient. She would dress slowly and go downstairs and find the innkeeper in the kitchen, with the warmth of the oven already filling the low-ceilinged room. And there would be something for breakfast, something plain and sufficient and exactly right. And she would eat it without hurrying, without looking at the time, because there was no time to look at here. No clock on the kitchen wall, no watch on her wrist, only the light at the window, which would tell her morning, and the quality of the air, which would tell her cold, and the stillness of the village, which would tell her that this day, like all the days here, had no particular errand to run, and no place in particular to be. She would begin. She would learn the village the way you learn a piece of music, not all at once, not from a description, but slowly, by returning to it again and again, by listening to the parts you missed the first time, by finding, each time you come back, something you had not noticed before. The particular way the light fell on the church wall at mid-afternoon, the name of the tree at the corner of the square, its branches holding snow in the exact and particular way that no other tree held snow. The sound of the stream in the morning, which was different from the sound of the stream at night. Fuller, she thought, or perhaps more patient. She was not sure yet. She would need more mornings to be sure. The book would rest on the bedside table, its cover blank, its pages full of hands that had chosen to stop, and somewhere, tonight, or next week, or in a month whose name she no longer needed to track, another storm would rise somewhere in the world outside, and another traveller would lose the road in the white and the dark, and would follow, as she had followed, the sound of water, and they would come down from the hillside and see the village below them, the windows glowing like steady stars, the snow falling in patient silence, the clock face pale in the tower, and they would go down, and the innkeeper would open the door, and there would be a room at the top of the stairs with a window that looked out on the frozen clock, and on the bedside table a small leather-bound book, its cover blank, its pages carrying all those different hands, would wait warm from the room's air, worn smooth at the corners, the pen in the drawer clean and ready for the traveller to open it and read and understand and add their own line to the long, quiet record of arrivals.